right, let's get to work here. We're on Marx, and today I'm going to be not very kind to Marx. And that's what we do in philosophy. Arguments are the heart of philosophy, as was beautifully demonstrated by Plato and Socrates over 2 millennia ago. It's not a bunch of doctrines. I think most people think, okay, well, there's this guy who thinks this, and this guy thinks this, and so what? But that's not really the heart of what we're doing. It's examining the arguments and the evidence to see if they hold water, and that's what we're going to do to Marx today. So just to, fair warning. However, I've been talking about Marx for 50 years or 40 years, and I often bring up these criticisms. And by the way, they're criticisms that aren't original with me. I think most modern Marxists are aware of these. Um, and I have yet to find a satisfactory answer for them or rebuttal. I have heard rebuttals, but they're not really very impressive. And remember, we're just examining the guy's ideas. This has nothing to do with our politics or what we think about whether the working class is being exploited. We can just assert that from the beginning and say, yes, we think that, and we think that um, we, well, I don't know if you all think this, but I imagine you all think that the um, discrepancy in income in the United States is probably not a good thing, and we'd like to see it remedied. Uh, I don't disagree with that. So that has nothing to do. We're just examining the thinker himself. So I don't know if you can distinguish those two in your minds, but that's what we're going to try to do. So I welcome certainly anybody who can answer these criticisms. I'd be very pleased to hear it. So, because that's, like I say, the argument is the thing. So, uh, let's just review. For one thing, let's just start with Hegel. The dialectic process that Hegel describes cannot be verified in any way. There's no evidence we can provide for this. He's given us a structure by which to understand human history and the development of human consciousness. This is not something that can be proven. It's a way of looking at it. Like I say, it's a narrative. It's one way of framing it. And may remember and probably puzzled when I described Marx as a romantic, and I kind of see Hegel as a romantic too, because they are not interested in. They might disagree, but they are not really interested in the specific analysis of specific detailed arguments. They are giving you a big picture. That was the style of the 19th century, the grand vision. And I think it's what a lot of people come for when they want to study philosophy is the grand vision of things. And that's what we get from Hegel. But none of the grand vision can be um, validated. We can say that it resonates with us, and that's why I call it a romantic vision. In romanticism, what we care about is what seems right to us, what feels right, what appeals to us emotionally, what really rings true to us. Those are not really scientific or logical uh, evidence for anything, just that it appeals to you. I'm sure Trump appeals to millions of people right now. There's no doubt about it. So the fact that it appeals to you emotionally is not evidence that it's true. So I happen to really be fond of Hegel and to a degree of Marx, but that doesn't mean that they can be supported. Their visions can be supported by evidence or argument or validated by logic. That's not what it means. So today we're going to attack Marx uh, and the premises and his conclusions. So just to review, Marx thinks that uh, one way of putting it is there was a time when human labor was not uh, alienated. It was immediate or not mediated. in the sense that it wasn't taken, it was personal labor that he did for himself and his family. And he was personally involved in the production and the use of the products that he made. But since the rise of capitalism, what's happened is that all labor is dead, and it's not related to you. It's alienating. What you're selling is your time on earth. You're not really um, producing a product that is immediately of value to you. It's a value as an abstraction on the market, and this causes alienation. And I'm very fond of this definition by Marx of capital as opposed to labor. Capital, he says, this is in capital. Capital is dead labor that vampire-like only lives by sucking living labor and lives the more labor it sucks. Now, those are some, but Marx talks in dramatic terms like this. He proclaims, and that's what he does. He's not providing evidence that capital is dead labor. He's saying that's what it is. This is his style of presenting himself. Um, so what we have as the root of all evil, as far as Marx is concerned, is surplus value. Surplus value is the difference between the labor value of what the worker does and the marketplace price of that, or the marketplace value of it. And the difference between those two is surplus value, and that's what's gathered by the capitalist, and we call it profit in usually in Western capitalism. And he calls it surplus because no additional value has been added to the product by the capitalist. The product is finished once the laborer has finished with his job. No additional value is being added between that point and the point where the consumer buys it. And so it's surplus. In Marx's view, it's kind of superfluous. It's kind of a fake value and it's surplus value. And his and he says this arrangement, the alienation of the worker is caused by this arrangement of surplus value. And so if we can eliminate surplus value, then uh, we can get a classless society, because what will happen is every laborer shares in his own uh, the value that he produces will not be added to it. Instead, that market value will come back to all the workers, and there won't be any, say, middleman getting the profits. And this will supposedly make for a classless society and also make him less alienated. Now, last time, I'm sorry Alan isn't here today, because last time he mentioned, I really wanted to ask him about this. He mentioned, I believe, that in a large and by the way, Marx thinks again that this the classless society can only follow a fully developed capitalism, because capitalism is going to devise all the industrial processes that make human labor much more um, productive. And what happens in a classless society is that the value of that production is shared by everybody instead of just being scraped off by the class that he calls the bourgeoisie. It'll be shared by everybody, and there'll be a classless society. And Alan pointed out, if I understood him correctly, that you still have an industrial process, and you can still feel alienated as an individual from the product that you're producing. I mean, just because everybody's sharing in the profit, okay, you're making more money, but you're still doing some kind of job that has nothing to do with you personally. So it's not, Alan, I believe, made this point. Does anybody remember that? Okay, well, I don't want to misrepresent what he said, which is why I'm sorry he isn't here. But yeah, Peter, can't hear you.
Thanks. Okay. there's some writing, I don't remember what it is. I've read much less Marx than you have, where toward the end of his life, he's imagining the communist society, and he says about labor, nevertheless, it still is the realm of necessity. And he says, yes, you have to admit that it's the realm of necessity, but in the communist society, we will also be able to get beyond the realm of necessity, presumably when we've done the necessary labor and will be in the true realm of freedom. I'm not saying I believe in that, just that it's a big concession on Marx's part to say, even under communism, you know, um, you know, making automobiles or cleaning toilets or raising wheat in a field is still going to belong to the realm of necessity. It won't be pure, pure pleasure or pure fulfillment or satisfaction.
Right. Well, we will. That's exactly right. We'll return to that. And one of the difficulties I just want to meta concern here with Marx is I mentioned last time about how ornate and kind of Germanic idealistic his writing is, and sometimes impenetrable. But not only that, what you mentioned is absolutely true that he didn't keep the same ideas throughout his life. So it depends on, it's kind of like the Bible. You could go into Mark someplace and find what you want to say
Yeah.
almost, which is makes it difficult for the presentation. Barry,
Tony, does Marx talk about the difference between goods and services? And are services not counted in this? Because I can make something, but somebody may provide the service of getting that to a marketplace where people it's useful to people. So why does that have value in his mind?
I think the way I would answer that is to say the service person is still probably operating a truck that's owned by the capitalist. And so even the service, he's also performing labor. The service person is performing labor. But when it comes to a product, he doesn't own the truck. He doesn't own the trucking company, doesn't own the warehouse. And so there's still a capitalist who is taking surplus value on top of the value of his labor. I think that's how I'd answer that. Doug?
How did he deal with art?
Art is idea. Again, I'm going to try to do the best I can to present what I think is the standard Marxist interpretation because I'm not sure he did write a shitload of stuff, and much of it was probably not meant for publication. By the way, it was published after his death. Like of the three volumes of Capital that we have, two of them were published posthumously. So not everything he wrote was published in his life, and it's very vague. Anyway, with that caveat, art is part of ideology, and so the artist in a bourgeois society is going to represent bourgeois values. I have a hard time buying that because I don't think art is limited to the expression of values at all, like particularly music. I'm not sure how exactly music can be said to be presenting the bourgeois view of life. But nevertheless, I mean, I suppose if you have lyrics, and they're protest lyrics, then yeah, there's a message there, but that's not always true. So anyway, that's probably the best I could do. After the revolution, we can assume that art will be the free expression of the human spirit, not encumbered by the ideology that's controlled by the bourgeoisie. I think that's what he would say. Best I can do. Sorry, Peter.
Yeah, I think there's a problem, or you
Wait.
could
Oh, yeah. Okay.
could say a contradiction in Marx's attitude toward art, because at least in the early years, he is so much against the division of labor that he likes to think, under communism, you could hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, herd cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner. And
Well,
I
that
don't,
was almost exactly right, Peter. That's
yeah,
pretty
I
good.
don't
I
think
have
he,
the quote here.
yeah, it's a great quotation. It's a
Yeah,
great kind of fantasy. Um,
right.
but I think he did not recognize how specialized really serious artists tend to have to be. And yet, what he liked, I mean, he read and was interested in popular novels like The Mysteries of Paris by Eugène Sue, you, but his favorite authors were Homer and Shakespeare. He could read Greek. David McClellan says he reread all of Aeschylus, which is 7 plays, presumably in Greek,
Oh my
every day.
God.
And he quotes Dante a lot and very appositely. So I think his own appreciation of art was much deeper than any theory that he ever even tried to get started about art or literature. And he wasn't particularly interested in literature or art that was overtly ideological, although many Marxists since his time have been.
Yeah, there's a whole, all these discussions, I go back and look at them, and there's so many, they're so fertile that we could go in so many directions. I think you're right about that. One thing just to take from that is that Marx was, let's not underestimate him as an intense guy with an intense intellect. I mean, that, I think I will affirm that. And, but I still think he made some mistakes,
Oh, yeah.
despite that. Did you have your hand up, Doug?
What about the trades? Like masons, chimney sweeps, plumbers, things like that. Because I own my own truck. I performed labor, working on people's chimneys or their wood stoves. Um, so what kind of how did that fall into his schema?
I was going to talk about this specific thing, but let me table that just for a second.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
what I want to do is frame the whole system, and then we're going to take it apart piece by piece. But yes, I think. Well, I will just answer directly a couple of things. In 2022, the U.S. had about 8.9 employ. In other words, 8.9% of the businesses in the United States were in other words, non-employer businesses, people who are running their own service or their own business, just like Doug. And the these non-employer firms accounted for 66.8% of U.S. GDP. That's not insignificant because if you compare it to um, the input of actual factory workers in the United States, um, about 8% of non-farm employment in the United States is direct factory work. And so the numbers aren't that different from the number of people who are actually working in a factory and the number of people who are individual employers by themselves. And since Marx is framing his system around the model of the factory worker, that's definitely the model he's going from. I don't think he really considers it. I am not aware of a place where he specifically considers the instance that you mentioned, Doug, of the individual. And certainly there were people like this in his day. I mean, there were chimney sweeps during Mark's time in London, for heaven's sakes, and they probably owned their own tools. They probably weren't employer of a big industry that supplied their tools and trucks. They probably were just individuals like yourself. So that's a problem because we're talking about percentages of people that he directly is addressing himself to, not being any greater than the people that he doesn't seem to be addressing himself to when it comes to the entire. Yeah, Peter.
Yeah, the thing about the factory workers, though, is that a lot of that has been outsourced from the United States. So the factory workers making most of our clothes are in China, Indonesia, Bangladesh, so on. And a lot of other things are being made in other countries more than the United States now. So I think that 8% is a little misleading. And I think Marx himself had been a little bit misled by it because as the years went on, he recognized that imperialism and finding new markets and new sources of cheap labor and raw materials was giving capitalism a much longer lease on life than he had originally thought it would have. As far as he was concerned, it was just, buying time. The ultimate result would be the same. And I'm not sure he was right about that, but that's what he thought. Just as Malthus would have said, yes, we've created a lot of food, but in the long run, population will catch up with us.
All right, well, you've raised another issue that I was going to get to, which is in the Communist Manifesto, Marx says workers of the world unite. And
Yeah,
as far as I can tell, he visualized this as a worldwide rebellion against capitalists. Well, that isn't how things have worked out. We
no,
still have countries, and the working people in every country are competing with the working people of every other country. And so, if you're a capitalist, you go shopping for workers in whatever the market makes available and is economical for you. So, this is the problem.
yeah. He
The
way underestimated the importance of nationality
Yeah,
and its
we aren't particularly interested in the workers of the other country getting a better shake. They're, in fact, they're
yeah,
quite the opposite. If you're in a union in the United States, you're pissed off when some jobs go to Asia and you have to compete with them instead of being in solidarity with those workers. You're pissed off at the capitalists that go over there and basically improve their lives because now they have employment where they didn't, and you're losing employment. So it's a zero-sum game for the unions, and that doesn't really fit Marx's model. I think it's, in other words, it's more complicated than just one class of people and another class of people. Okay, another thing is that Marx sees that there are only two classes. And we've already touched on this because what about the class of uh, individual entrepreneurs like Doug or artisans that work by themselves? There are also, like right down the hill from me, there's a place called Jackson's Hardware, which is employee owned. It's an old business. And Mr. Jackson, when he retired, he just sold the business to his employees, and they have an arrangement that's quite like a communist arrangement within the belly of the beast. They share in the profits, and they all have their different jobs. And I'm not sure exactly how it works out, but it somehow has to do with you getting vetted. The longer you're there, the more share of the company you have, regardless of your position in the company, whether you're the janitor or the accountant. You all get vetted and you all share in the profits, as kind of like we would expect in a communist situation. So that's a little fuzzy. Another fuzzy thing about the current state of affairs is that I don't think Marx paid much attention to that is the stock market. 40% of the stock market is owned by the pension plans of people who are presumably working people. And that's a lot of money. So are they the capitalists or are they the workers? It seems like that line. I'd love one of you economists, but Barry, you're much more versed in economics than I am. Can you clarify that for me or show me how I'm mistaken about this? Mr. Braverman, unmute yourself.
Can you state the question again, Tony? I was
Oh,
looking at a text.
what? You weren't paying attention to all my gems of wisdom?
Guilty as
What I
charged.
said, what what I said, what I said was he believes that he describes the world as being made up of two classes, separated by surplus value: those that get it and those that produce the actual
Right.
value. Okay. So what I said was he didn't seem to take serious account of the stock market. And I said 40% of the stock market is owned by presumably the pension plans of average working people. So are they the capitalists or are they the workers? And by
It's a
the
good.
way, they have a say in how the company, they're going to have a voice on the board of directors of these companies. if they have a big pension plan, that's going to have a voice in the management of companies, as we see with General Motors and Ford right now. So what do you
Right.
think?
Well,
Clarify it for me.
I think you are correct, but I would guess, I'll just go way out on a limb here and say that what Marx might say to that is that the stockholders are simply buying a share of a capitalist um, enterprise. And so while they may be benefiting as you would want a proletarian to benefit, they are really only aiding and abetting the capitalist enterprise.
But which class do they belong to?
Well, I guess I would say they're tainted by their participation in the capitalist game. They can't claim to be purely proletarians if they're stock owners.
It seems to me that there's a little fuzziness here. And Marx, the thing is, it's way easier to hate the capitalists if they're a clear class of people and they don't involve like your uncle or yourself, for example. I have a pension,
Well,
so
see, this
When did
relates to the
pension? When were
go ahead, Doug.
pensions created? When did I mean? Were there pensions? When did the stock market? Well, the stock market's been around forever in some form. But
well, not as it wasn't very well developed at all in Marx's time, if at all.
so he's so we're taking sort of late era capitalism and applying Marx to something that he had no idea about in a
That's
way.
right. And some people have argued that it's best to look at Marx as a 19th century character and not particularly relevant, at least across the board, to current. That's been argued. Peter, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just found something out to my surprise. Everyone pretty much knows that Marx and his fairly large family were poor for years in London, even with financial help from Friedrich Engels. But in 1869, Engels sold out his part of the family textile business, settled a pension on Marx. So for the last 10 or 13 years of his life, he had some money and he actually invested some of it in stocks.
I didn't know that.
If he had been making a good living that way, I think, you'd have to call him a rentier,
Yeah.
but I don't imagine that he, got that much addition to his income by investing in stocks. But he was aware of it as a possibility. He was aware of all sorts of classes. The argument, and I'm not sure I buy the argument, but Marx's argument is there are a number of classes. At the top are the capitalists, at the bottom is the proletariat, in the middle are people like independent chimney sweeps and other independent workers or entrepreneurs who are trying their best not to slip into the proletariat, but sooner or later, according to Marx, they will. So
Uh,
that's, I think, his line on that.
the okay, I'm sorry, Barry, go ahead, and
Yeah,
I
I
have
was
a
just going to
comment to
say,
make about that.
I think the problem here in his thinking is he's focusing only on the individual worker and his role in all this. He's not looking at the total wealth creation for society, and that's why that relates to your question about international trade. Yes, we capitalists will move capital to the place where they can get the most value for the workers' performance, but and this may exploit those workers in Vietnam or China just as much as they would here, but there might be a wealth creation for the overall world that he's not accounting for, so that we're actually raising the boat is raising the ships for everybody.
I brought this up to Lowell a while back, and what I said was basically, look, originally a big screen TV was 20,000 bucks, and now you can get them for 500 bucks at Walmart. Uh, isn't that de facto an increase in the wealth of the working class because they can buy something, their life is improved materially by a product that was made through exploitation of somebody else? I I was just asking him how we sort that out, how we think of that, how we
I
should
mean,
conceptualize it.
think about the assembly line of cars. Without okay, the assembly line inherently alienates labor because if in a Marxist world, each person would make one car himself completely. That car would cost an incredible amount of money. But by making cars more economically through an assembly line, think of all the value that is created for all the people that now own those cars. So how does he account for that?
Well, the thing is that remember he's what's called, I don't know if we used this term last time, a dialectical materialist or a materialistic dialect. That's the term, a dialectical materialist. And it just means that he's taken Hegel's framework of this dialectic, which involves mediation and then, well, immediate and then separation, like I use the baseball player example where you don't feel yourself and then rejoining. And he's applying that. He said Hegel was upside down. He's applying that to how the economy works. And the economy results in the ideology of the people in the civilization. So he has this, sometimes it's called architectonic view, an overarching view of what the structure of everything is. And what I'm starting to try to make a case for is that it isn't as clear. Uh, it doesn't bifurcate itself as clearly as he would like it to seem. And if it doesn't, then the whole dynamic of this thing being stretched to the breaking point, which was his major dynamic, that capitalism will eventually there'll be so much of a separation between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie that things will come unglued and there will be a revolution. Well, if you can't divide things into two classes, then that dynamic of the dialectic, I don't see how it's applied. I don't see how it can be clearly applied. Uh, and that's what I'm here for somebody to explain it to me. You guys who are maybe a little more versed in this stuff than I am, I don't see how that works um, uh, as a theory of how how society works. Now, the uh, um, the, the next time is ruling intellectual at its disposal has control at the same time over the means of mental production, so that thereby, generally speaking, the ideas of those who lack ideal expression, materials, the idea that our motivations, our conceptions of ourselves, and our values and our relationships are shaped by the ideology of the working class, I mean, of the capitalist class, which itself is the product of material circumstances. I think that's what he's saying, is it not? The idea is that our ideas are really created by the material circumstances, and those circumstances are controlled by the owners of the means of production. Am I correct there, Barry?
I, I, I think what you're saying is correct, but I don't think his argument is correct. I mean, what about the muckraking journalists who did their work to expose problems in, factories and exploitation of workers, and were still publishing their things through a publication enterprise of a newspaper or a magazine that was owned by capitalists?
Yeah, it okay. For start, hey Alan, I I mentioned you earlier, and I'm sorry you didn't make it because I wanted to discuss something you had raised, but I'm sorry we did it with without you. Um, anyway, the motivations and the conceptions of people are so infinite and vast that I'm not sure. Here's what I put down on it. It's not currently possible to assign quantifiable scientific values to the amount of motivation that stems from economic circumstances compared to the amount that stems from lust, fantasy, superstition, racial hatred, for example. In other words, I I have a very difficult time trying to imagine that all people are motivated by these economic considerations. I mean, certainly it would be naive to say they're not, that it has no influence on them. That would be ridiculous. Of course they are, but to center all motivation on the economic circumstances of the class that you were in, or I think what he's saying is that the ruling class determines these motivations. And so, Alan, last time, this will apply to what you had to say, I think. Last time you talked about education, how basically you're in education, you're industrial, you're sensitizing people to their industrial role as worker bees, and they're being told what to do by the institution. And they're by the time they're 20 years old, this is the way of life for them. I always used to say that to my students. I said, "What are you learning through your entire education? You're learning that there's some guy standing in front of you that you got to pay attention to and obey. That's what you're learning. Doesn't matter what the subject is. You learn that over and over and over again." I assume that's kind of sort of what you were saying, Alan. Not exactly, but yeah, that structure. Counter to that, though, I would say that all of us are products of that same system, and we haven't really followed that path. I myself don't really relate to that because I didn't feel indoctrinated. I was excited by learning everything and my friends and all that. I didn't care. Yeah, okay, that's the structure, but I'm not the structure. But I don't know how all of you related to it. I know a lot of people do. They resent it. They say, "Oh, I'm being trained to be a worker bee." I didn't have that reaction to education myself. Um, you want to
Oh,
comment
Tony, my
on
high
any of
school,
that?
yeah,
Uh,
my high school vice principal, when I was sent down there for one of my many sins against the
Order.
indoctrination, said,
Good for you.
your whole problem is you haven't learned to conform in your thinking. And I asked him to put it on my college recommendations. And
Yeah.
yes, but at
Well,
least,
your problem was exposing yourself, Laurel.
yeah, no, the high school was at least quite overtly about that. And the propaganda was very capitalist oriented. I didn't sense that at Pomona, but maybe Pomona was more
Wait
subtle.
a minute. If you took a Latin class that was propagandistic, what you took a chemistry class? What
Well,
do you
no, I took a
mean?
Latin class that was I wasn't supposed to be in because I was supposed to be doing other things, and I sneaked out to art class and got in trouble for that when I was finally caught. But yeah, the high school was pretty overt about you're supposed to sit still, shut up, and um, except I think I might have gotten that particular thing might have been in trouble because of questioning the quarter on capitalism, which had a whole bunch of propaganda, including saying that the communists, indoctrinated their students.
Where was this?
It's San Jose.
Oh my God, I never got anything like that.
Well, I suggested that maybe the pictures of the Russian students being indoctrinated could actually just be switched for the picture of us. Anyway, I got sent to the vice principal's office.
Well, rightly so, you communist.
But Tony,
Hey,
actually, the thing I really wanted to ask about Tony is part of Marx's problem with all of this that he's looking for predicting the future in a way that's really very difficult to do and trying to find an eternal verity that maybe data doesn't the data can't tell you about something eternal. And doesn't Plato sort of argue there are things you can't really know?
We're going to get back to that. That's a good point, Laurel, but I don't want to, I don't,
But you've been telling us about Plato, and now it comes back.
okay. Barry.
Because Tony, you and I have talked about this over the years. Isn't this really a case of Marx illuminating something that is actually very true about the relationship between the worker and his product and the capitalist and so on, but trying to extrapolate it in a much bigger arena to explain all of how society operates. So he's had, in other words, you could have an accurate idea about a relationship, but if you try to apply it to a context much broader than you should, you end up making poor judgments.
I think that's right. I don't dismiss any of these things, any of these guys, and I've already mentioned some of the people we'll talk about, Hobbes and Darwin and Marx, but Marx and Hegel and Hobbes in particular, I don't dismiss any of them as being completely wrong. It's just that uh, the way I would put it is they get too far over their skis and they apply too much. They want a system that explains everything, as we all do. We want some simple way of understanding the world because it's so confusing. And that's what they're trying to do. Bless their hearts. They're trying to understand it, comprehend it. And in doing so, what you have to do is simplify. This is going to be one of the themes of Nietzsche. Uh, so yeah, I think that's right. Now, Peter, sorry. Yeah.
Engels later said that he thought both he and Marx had overstated the degree to which the economy determines everything, but that they were excited by their discovery and they couldn't help exaggerating its importance. Um,
Really, I'd
yeah,
love to see that quote.
this is a very rough paraphrase, but in the German ideology, he seems to be talking about an ideology that is coming from the top and more from the capitalists than from the aristocrats and the church in his day. But he also, many places, assumes that people don't always buy that ideology. They fight back against it. There's one point in the Communist Manifesto when he says the proletarians don't care about law, morality, religion, etc., because they know that they're just things being imposed on them. That's the opposite extreme. But I think he does recognize that there is some kind of human freedom, even if many later Marxists refused to admit that, beginning with Karl Kautsky and including the Soviets and the Chinese communists. And one of the things he says is when the crisis comes, there will be people from the ruling classes who will side with the workers. That's clearly a free choice. I think his example is Percy Bysshe Shelley. I mean, he was a romantic in many ways, but he himself was a muckraking journalist. He wasn't dismissive of muckraking journalists.
When you say he, you mean Marx?
Marx himself,
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah, well, Shelley tried to be, but was a failure as a muckraking journalist. Um, he recognizes that you have a certain amount of freedom, but that you're never free of economic necessity. And under capitalism, that economic necessity has a way of like infiltrating every corner of your life. So he does seem to believe there is a good kind of family, and he had on the whole, a pretty happy family life, although they were poor. And capitalism destroys that. He has a sense that there is some kind of human freedom. It's just very battered in the world that he knows, and I think it's pretty battered in the world we know.
Is
Uh,
it is it really though? I mean, how much of your dissatisfaction in life or your unhappiness is directly caused, aside from people who are really miserably poor?
mhm.
How much of is it caused by material circumstances? I'd be quite willing to argue that people with $10 million in the bank just get just as pissed off as somebody who's making 50,000 a year, and for similar reasons. They don't have enough money.
Yeah, I agree with that. But it isn't just your personal finances. You know, Marx didn't ask for very much. His wife and children would have liked there to be much more than there was. It's partly a question of what's the system that you live under. There's a D.H. Lawrence poem called Wages. I wouldn't make a great claim for it as a poem, but he says, you know, the world that we live in is like a prison. Working for wages is like being a prisoner. Being a superintendent or a, you know, executive or a boss is like being a trustee in the prison. And living on your income is like being free to stroll anywhere you want to, only there are these prison walls all around you wherever you stroll. You know, it's a very melodramatic picture, but I think that's more the problem than that, you know, people who are more or less in the middle class or the working class where people are still making it don't have enough money.
If
It's
I
not
heard that D.H. Lawrence sentiment from somebody, I'd say, sounds like a personal problem to me.
in
Uh,
part in part it was, but you know, it's the personal problem of a great novelist and poet whose father was a coal miner and whose mother was an ambitious former school teacher. That is, he didn't really belong in the working class, and he didn't think very much of the upper class that he had at one point worked so hard to get into. He says at one point, and then there came the saddest day when I had to tell myself plain, the upper classes are just a fraud. You'd better get down again. But I agree, it's partly personal.
Hmm.
Yeah, I just don't know what to make of people's psychology, individual. As far as my experience tells me, every single individual has their own psychology, and it's hard to say what the inputs are and the outputs are and how they're related. And I just can't be the judge of it. So the idea that I'd come up with a system that would allow me to understand the masses except in the broadest kind of generalities uh, of specific uh, quantifiable things seems fantasy to me. I just, this whole idea of trying to understand uh, historical things, historical patterns and causes and effects. It's interesting, and they're all important to know. I wouldn't say I don't dismiss any of them, but to be, remember now, here's the kind of my final thoughts about this guy. I'm being asked to go to war. I'm being asked to participate in a revolution. Let me give you this. This is a letter to Engels in 1856. You know that I am not a supporter of the popular use of violent means, but I consider it necessary when there is no other way to break the resistance of the ruling classes. So I'm being asked perhaps to go to war, and yet the what I say the premises of this war is are very shaky. Marx cannot prove that the dialectic process actually drives history. And by his own reason, I haven't gotten to this one yet. He cannot count for how he arrives at his own valuation of equality. I'm going to come back to that. He cannot guarantee what will happen after the revolution. My guess is that people will still be pissed off and still find enmity and stress and alienation after the revolution. And then with all this shaky justification, I'm going to be asked to kill people. I don't think it's sufficient. And this brings me back to the. Do you remember what Hume's guillotine is? Hume's guillotine is that you can't, it's the is ought problem. You can't determine what is right from observing what is true. Because two people can observe the exact same situation, and one will think it's okay, and another will think it is unjust. I think Donald Trump is a good example of somebody who has a different opinion of what is just and what isn't just than I do. And yet we could be looking at exactly the same facts. So let's say, okay, this is an oversimplification of Marx, but then on the other hand, Marx himself was oversimplifying some things, I believe, even in his really ornate language. Uh, he we can ask two things. There are two basic issues. These are the most fundamental issues I have with Marx. Number one, he says that ideology is what creates the ideology of the ruling class is, and somebody brought this up before. The ideology of the working class is what creates essentially the mentality of everyone. That ideology permeates society. And so we can legitimately ask, what does he stand outside that dynamic that he's just described? Because he is apparently from uh, a elevated meta view, understanding or describing what the dynamics are in society. But somehow, in order to do that, it seems to me he would have to stand above the society. And yet he says that our ideas are created by the ideology of the ruling class. And the second problem is, where does he get the idea that it would be better to have an egalitarian society than have a stratified society? Why is a classless society superior to one where there are class differences? And I don't think Marx can answer this question. This is a question that Marxists are aware of, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, that um, the idea of equality as an ideal can't be derived from the dynamic that he describes your intellect as coming from. Uh, the ideal of equality doesn't exist any place. We don't see equality in the animal kingdom. We don't see it in the human kingdom. Why is it an ideal? Why is it something we strive for? And if all of our ideals come ultimately from an economic situation, where in the economic world do we find equality? So I'm not sure how Marx can account for his own values. He clearly he this is recognized as a problem with Marxism. He can't decide whether he wants to be a scientist or a moralist. And he desperately, at the end of his life, he studied furiously at the British Museum to try to come up with empirical validation for his theories. And this was never done. It was never completed. And that's why Capital was never completed. Very.
I would say that, yeah, I agree with everything you've said. It seems to me that egalitarianism or equality is not what we should be shooting for. I think the greatest good for the greatest number is a much higher goal to reach for. And I think capitalism is a great mechanism for getting there, or is at least a potential mechanism for getting there. For example, in Marx's model, profit is an exploitive thing. It's exploiting somebody, and I would argue that in a well-regulated capitalist society, profit is actually a way of guaranteeing or ensuring that what is the output of everyone's collective labor is actually getting to benefit as many people as possible, because a capitalist who can't make profit doesn't that goes out of business, and one who does is delivering products to people or services that they actually want and is making their lives better. So capitalism, laissez-faire capitalism, I think, is very destructive, but well-regulated capitalism is a very good mechanism. And also the issue of innovation. Profit is the impetus for innovation. This is why when people try to equalize everything, they end up with static thinking. They don't innovate.
The I think all that's right. The risk portion of the, it is important that Marx doesn't give us a clear idea of what's an egalitarian or classist society, how it would work, and how the dictatorship of the proletariat would work, how the structure of the government work if everybody had the same input. It's not clear to me if everybody owns it, like let's just say the stock market tomorrow, everybody gets the same share of stocks. Everybody in the United States gets an equal share of stocks. So we're all sharing in surplus value. How would how would we invest then? How would we decide how to invest? Do we have a vote? Like, do we have elections every couple of months and decide what we're going to invest in? I'm not sure that's a very efficient way to run things. Usually the advances are made by nutcases that risk everything. The transatlantic cable is an example, Ford's an example, Jobs and Wozniak are examples. These guys were way out on the edge of society. I don't see how a democratic investment system would invest in something completely risky that everybody thought wouldn't work, which is what was said about all these guys. So that's an important thing that Marx doesn't address. I'm not saying it can't be addressed. I'm just saying he doesn't address it. And also to your point, Barry, how do we know what evidence do we have that a completely economically egalitarian society would provide the greatest happiness for the greatest number? How would we substantiate that? That's a given for Marx that human beings will be happier. I have Peter's quote here, if you want to hear the word for word, how we'll live after the revolution thing. Uh, I'm not sure that's realistic, but even if it were realistic, how can we confirm empirically that that would make the most people happy? And isn't that what we want? Suppose everybody's equal, but everybody's even more unhappy than they are now. But how do we know they won't be? Peter, can't hear you. Unmute yourself. Peter, unmute yourself. I can't hear you.
Did I
There we
unmute?
go. Oh, there we go.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. I agree with the arguments against radical egalitarianism. I don't think absolute equality is even a good ideal, let alone a practicable ideal. There was a recent book about Marx. I only read a review of it, and I can't remember who wrote it or what it's called, that made the argument that Marx is actually more interested in freedom than he is in equality. That not the classless society will not necessarily be equal in every other way. It just won't have classes in it, which also I find a little hard to believe. But I think Marx did care about freedom, and he doesn't make a fetish of equality in the way that many socialists and communists since Marx have done.
Yeah,
I think that's a good thing about him. He also is very clear that capitalism has created enormous wealth. Uh,
right.
the problem is not that it doesn't create wealth effectively, but is the wealth fairly shared among people, at least according to who creates it. So he has, the famous slogan from each according to his ability to each according to his contribution. He says for a while it has to be like that. And then eventually, when you have a community where people really are, okay with each other, let's say, it's from each according to his ability to each according to his need. He recognizes that as a kind of utopian or messianic goal. And it's true that if you don't share Marx's messianism, and I think toward the end of his life, he himself became more and more dubious about it, um, then you're not going to share, the whole philosophical system of Marxism.
I
Yeah, go ahead.
I just kind of I don't want to wrap this up, but just to put it in a bow for myself, I think Marx fits into a category of myth makers. This is why I call him romantic at the very beginning. That he's kind of like the Christians. He's kind of like, in a way, the Greeks. There is a We find ourselves in a time that's unsettled. It's not perfect. There are a lot of things wrong with it. But once upon a time, there was an Eden where everything was perfect. This is a very common myth in many, many societies, primitive and, quote, advanced. There was an Eden at one time. And for Marx, it was the time when people were immediately related to the products of their labor. And then there's this whole period of mediation, which we're in now, where our labor has been taken from us and it's not directly benefiting ourselves and our families. But there is a time in the future, you could call it heaven or redemption, that we can look forward to, where
Yeah.
all of this will go away and will be returned to our Edenic state. I think that myth is a very, very powerful myth, and you can just the Odyssey, here was Odysseus plowing his field, minding his own business, and he's thrown into this war for 10 years. It takes him another 10 years to get back. He has all these struggles, but in the end, he's reunited with Penelope. This structure of this myth is a very broad structure. I think you'd see it in Joseph Campbell or the Golden Bough or any number of mythological treatments. And I, that's how I look at Marx. It's a myth that is very. I think everybody should certainly be aware of him. But the power of Marxism, I think, is that he satisfies that mythic structure.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
that makes
if he really believed in freedom, why did he coin the term dictatorship of the proletariat? I mean, I think that's a terrible phrase. And, it really did aim toward dictatorship of the proletariat, in the Russian Revolution, for example. I mean, it's not a freedom-loving phrase, that's for sure.
No. There is an answer to that, although I really wish he had never used the phrase. The Roman dictatura was a dictatorship where, in a terrible crisis, all authority was vested in one man for a limited period of time, typically for something like 6 months. And Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus was famous for having defeated the enemy and then gone back to plowing his fields. So I think Marx's idea, and I'm not saying it's a good idea, just that it isn't as bad as it sounds, is that temporarily after the revolution, there would have to be a dictatorship of the proletariat, which would be soon relaxed once the victory was consolidated. And unfortunately, Lenin, who was a great man, but partly responsible for the rigidifying of Marxist thought, basically thought the workers don't know what they're doing. There has to be a vanguard party to tell them what they're doing. Once you believe that, the dictatorship is going to last indefinitely. And as somebody said, a dictatorship can't be a dictatorship of the whole proletariat. All it can be is a dictatorship in the name of the whole proletariat. And that does lead to new forms of tyranny. But he saw it as a temporary expedient. He didn't see it as the way things should be.
But the actual mechanics of how you would, first of all, have a dictatorship of the proletariat, and then somehow transfer that to a democracy or something. That's
Uh,
completely unspoken. He doesn't ever say, as far as I know.
The
Barry,
implication, I think,
uh,
is once the enemies are defeated, we won't have to have the dictatorship anymore. And
yeah, but how does that
unfortunately,
transfer? How
yeah,
does that
when
transfer happen?
how will you know that the enemies are defeated?
Exactly.
Most people will not want to give it up.
Exactly, just like that. He says we might have to use violence to overthrow the capitalists. Well, how about the dictators? What are we going to use to overthrow the dictators?
Yeah.
Barry, you have
yeah.
your hand.
I think his theory about labor, and it mandates toward the focuses on the individual, and it sort of mandates against cooperative thinking, because the minute a group of people get together to create something, there's a distancing of the individual from the product, and that cooperation leads to a whole bunch of innovative ideas and structures that can actually yield more total benefit and value than the work of individuals. So I think he's got I think it's again a romantic notion. Everybody working on his own little thing and owning it, will so limit the total output of a society that he's throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
He was all for
Uh,
cooperation.
it's
But then
just
who
that
gets
it's
but who owns the thing? I mean,
it's
that's how corporations are just, in my opinion, in a perfect capitalist world, they're just an aggregation of innovators have gotten together to do something great. And if they're not doing something that the people value, they don't grow. And if they are, then they do grow.
I I mentioned last time we're going to call it quits in a minute, but I mentioned last time about Laurel. You want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that first of all, I think an awful lot of Marx is analogous to the old Far Side cartoon of the mathematicians looking at the blackboard and say and how do you and then a miracle occurs and there's the answer. And that's really a lot of the picture of the ultimate classless society is that and then a miracle occurs. But the other comment is that on on equality and inequality, there's a lot of actual empirical evidence that the higher the structural inequality, be it economic or power in a society, um, that there's a price in unhappiness, misery, lack of productivity.
Yeah.
And so I think it's not it's whether we're striving for a classless society that there's at least some reason to think that more equality, be it more access to the levers of power or more access to resources, um, has some advantages. If you want to be evidence based, how you get there, and that again, even in the history of our country, there have been times of less inequality and more equality, and you could argue that those had some merit, but there is some evidence to support a quest for less inequality.
Yep.
And
What just one very topical thing that I mentioned last time, artificial intelligence in the next 5 years is gonna, I'm I just don't know what's going to happen, but I can't believe it's not going to be extremely disruptive because I'm already getting feeds. This morning, I got a feed on my Facebook page that advertised somebody who would write a song for, not somebody, an artificial intelligence machine would write a song for you. You just tell it what to write and it'll write a song for you. And there's a little fee, and it takes 3 minutes. So, that is very strange. I'm glad I'm not competing because who knows whether they'll come up. Who was it that said last time that there'll be a bestseller that's produced by artificial intelligence? Alan. And same with a hit record. How do we know that we're not going to hear a hit record in the next year that's produced by artificial intelligence? And at that point, what is art? You want to recoil and say, "Oh, well, that's not really human art." Well, if it makes somebody tear up and cry and it's very has an emotional impact, how am I going to say it's not art? How are you going to outlaw it and say, well, that's not really art? That's a very strange thing. Anyway, with regard to Marx, the point is that you don't need all these songwriters. You just have an artificial intelligence machine that's owned by an oligarchy, and you don't need all these guys. And as Doug pointed out last time, the people that will be left are all the tradesmen that have to do stuff that artificial intelligence can't do. We're not going to have an artificial intelligent chimney sweep or house cleaner or you got to have a human being do it. And all these
Yeah, a
trades,
Roomba, a sophisticated Roomba,
a
Tony.
Roomba, yeah, well, maybe you can have a robot clean a house. I'm not so sure. But yeah, and this is going to happen very fast. I mean, I think by the time we're too old to talk about this, it'll be accomplished. And that is a serious concentration of wealth in the hands of the people who own
Yeah.
the artificial intelligence, and wealth taken away from the people who are now producing uh, value with their labor. It'd be very interesting. I don't know what there is to do to stop it.
The tradesman will own the robot.
That go tradesmen. I'm all for that.
Silicon
Um,
Valley has gone from being quite liberal to being, at least, the leadership is very much in favor of this concentration of wealth and no
who is?
decisions to stop it.
No, who is in favor of it?
Well,
The orange guy.
Oh,
the Silicon Valley oligarchs with the AI developers, owners are very much in favor of an unregulated effort to concentrate to do this and concentrate their control and wealth and their control of the government, whatever levers of power there are. That so much as we might approve of some of capitalism's contributions, I'm not so sure I want few corporations running the country even more than they already do.
well, Laurel, it doesn't matter what you want. That's the thing. If we're Marxists, this is all going to be controlled by market forces, and the market forces are going to say the profit is going to congeal at the top. Musk realizes this. I know everybody hates Musk now, but he did say that we're going to need a universal basic income.
So,
I
so
think we're gonna.
everybody should read Krugman's newsletter this morning. It discusses the concept of inshitification. Yeah, I don't think he came up with that term, but it describes so, modern corporate social networking, whatever, et cetera, media, what happens to them over time, where they start out serving the customer. They find out that they can make a lot more money if they, in fact, screw the customer and raise prices. And then they become inept and they
Yeah, but I
die.
mean, what difference does it make that we're pissed off about it? If that is the force that's going to, we're just observers, and
If
this is
people
what's going to happen.
stop subscribing to Xfinity or whatever,
Well,
I
you
mean,
could do whatever you want that makes you feel better, but it's not going to affect what happens to the economy. And I'm I'm not the media is
okay.
just full of everybody being pissed off right now, and it's not my vibe. It's not my it's not my sweet spot. I even though I understand and agree with just about everything that's being said, there is such lovely things in life, and I think that is something. The advent of AI is so far out of my control, and all I can do is whine about it, and I don't find that a good activity.
I agree, Tony, but speaking as someone in medical research, another field I do not think can be taken over by AI,
Right. There you go.
medical research and public health and actually hands-on caring for people, some of it, but having seen what AI produces in trying to aggregate research or predict illness and health, it's not going to successfully and adequately replace what we have now, and we're
But
getting a
in a
taste. And I don't know what we do to fight back, but those of us in that world are doing what we can.
well, but in a perfect world, we want to take advantage of the amazing power that AI can bring to these fields without limiting what humans can do. I mean, it opens up whole new opportunities for what humans can do, I think.
Magical thinking. We are doing some of that. We're using it to replace or supplement some of what we do, but I've also seen the crap that comes out without human understanding. And Chat GPT invents references, AI comes up with spurious associations that can't be replicated because it doesn't understand what's going on. So it's a helpful tool. Okay, so I'm using AI right now. I'm involved in vaccine design, and there's amazing stuff you can do with the really high-powered computation and what AI allows you to work through. But they still wind up having to be tested to see if they work, and they don't work always for reasons that AI doesn't anticipate, because the immune system is extraordinarily complicated and
But
translate.
Laurel, isn't that true of any technology? Isn't that true of any technology that's developed that left to its own devices without human intervention? There's no guarantee that it will be beneficial, but in partnership with human regulation and human participation, it can be extraordinarily beneficial.
The problem is that the techie world doesn't recognize the necessity of human
No, that's not true. That's unfair. The people understand
fighting
that.
with insurance companies over stuff that is AI making stupid decisions. And the
Let's just we're in an early stage of this. It needs time to work itself out, I think.
There's
I,
an Italian sociologist who recently wrote a book. I don't remember his name. I just read a review of it that argues the main purpose of AI is to control, intimidate, or replace workers. That not that there are no valuable uses for it. I recognize the truth of what Laurel's saying, but that the main social dynamic driving AI is to make sure that workers stay in a completely subordinate place.
Whether
That may be too simple, but I
I
think
think
it's
it's
a
not only
very
too
important
simple, but
motive.
it's it's creating a devil. It doesn't matter though if that he thinks that, because it's going to happen. There's
Yeah.
nothing we can do to stop it, and
Well,
you can attribute evil uh, motives to it, but it's not
yeah.
going to make any difference. It's reality now.
But, as philosophers, we ought to know what truly is the motive behind it and the dynamic behind it. If that is the motive and dynamic, it
Well,
helps
if you
even to
have
know it, even if we can't immediately, take revolutionary action against it, which of course we can't.
if I'm a doctor and I've seen 3,000 cases of something in my lifetime, but the AI can see a billion cases of it and notice little nuances in the data that I can't notice because I don't live for 30 lifetimes.
Yeah.
I'm going to want to take advantage of that. And I don't care. It's not a matter of me wanting to suppress any worker or anything like that. It's what is your intended outcome.
Well, use the AI, but recognize that human beings, as Laurel said, the immune system is incredibly complicated, and you want to get it from the AI, but you don't want to just automatically follow what it tells you to
Well,
do.
no,
That's all.
I think that's recognized. Uh, Geez, we've gone on way too long and we could go another hour, I'm sure, with this. It's always a blessing to meet with you guys. I'm not exaggerating that. I really, really appreciate it and look forward to it. So next time we're going to be moving on, however, from Marx and putting this behind us. And Darwin is, I think, who I'm going to talk about next time. And then Darwin's still in the 19th century. And then the other 19th century people that we're going to be discussing are Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, and then perhaps Wittgenstein. That's the remaining stuff we have to discuss, as far as I'm concerned, and like that. So, is anybody? Oh, a couple of technical things I forgot to mention. Number one, if you look at the videos that are created in the speaker mode, how we do that is my wife has another computer that's booted up to our discussion here, but it's put in speaker mode. That's the only way we can record it. We have to record it two different times, and then I go through and edit them and and then post them. But the speaker mode has had some glitches to it, and that's because that computer is connected through Wi-Fi. And I was scrambling around looking for an Ethernet cable this morning, which I could not find. I couldn't believe I didn't have an Ethernet cable. So I'm going to try to get Ethernet next time so that hopefully the glitches on the speaker view will be reduced. Right now, the better of the two is the gallery view. I don't know if you guys ever look at these, but um, I do have them up there. And the other thing I wanted to ask is anybody having any trouble logging in? Do you have any glitches with logging in? It always works. Okay.
Nope.
Good for that. Okay, that's just the technical stuff I wanted to get off the uh, get done before we close today. All right, so everybody have a lovely weekend,
Have
and
a
we
good
will see
weekend.
you. See you. How you doing, Ann?
Oh, I'm okay. I have a Zoom with the Mississippi Arts Commission in a couple of minutes,
All right.
but
Well, you
I'm
you take
fine.
care of that.
Yeah, I will. Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.
All right. Bye
Bye.
bye.
Bye.